For more than 60 years, the world has accepted one simple version of what happened in Dallas. A lone gunman fired from a sixth-floor window and killed the president. But the closer you look, the more that story falls apart. There's a single bullet that somehow did the work of three. A Secret Service agent who waited 6 decades before admitting what he really saw. A presidential brain that quietly vanished from the National Archives. And in 2025, the government finally released 80,000 pages of classified documents, only to leave the biggest questions exactly where they were. Something about this case has never added up. The most disputed object in the entire case is a piece of metal known officially as Commission Exhibit 399. For the Warren Commission, this bullet had to explain an enormous amount. According to its 1964 conclusion, President Kennedy was hit by the same bullet that also wounded Texas Governor John Connally, seated in front of him in the limousine. Critics later called this the magic bullet theory. The claim is that one bullet was fired from above and behind, entered Kennedy's upper back, came out through his throat, then kept going and hit Connally in the back. From there, it shattered a rib, tore through his chest, smashed his wrist, and finally ended up in his thigh. One bullet is asked to account for 7 wounds across 2 men while passing through bone more than once. Critics argue the path does not make sense. Kennedy and Connally were not seated in a clean straight line. The seating positions make the shot look awkward. Supporters answer that Connally was sitting lower and slightly inward, changing the angle more than people think. Even so, the argument never truly went away. Then there is the bullet itself. Seth 399 was found in very good condition, almost untouched, despite the claim it had torn through 2 bodies and struck multiple bones. That alone has bothered people for decades. A bullet that supposedly did so much damage appeared with very little visible damage of its own. That detail has never sat comfortably with critics of the lone gunman conclusion. For a long time, the magic bullet argument stayed trapped in diagrams and forensic disputes. Then, in 2023, a man who had been there that day and stayed quiet for decades said something that reopened the whole issue. Paul Landis was a Secret Service agent riding on the running board of the follow-up car, only feet away from the president. For years, he accepted the official finding that Oswald acted alone. But later, after thinking again about what he saw, Landis admitted he had started to question that conclusion. What made his account so important was one specific memory. Landis said he saw a bullet lodged in the back of the limousine seat after the shooting. He said he picked it up and placed it on the president's stretcher at Parkland, not Connally's. If that memory is accurate, then the bullet investigators treated as proof of the single bullet theory may not have passed through both men at all. That would strike at the very center of the official explanation. A memory recalled after 60 years is not hard proof. Other experts point out that Landis's version does not fit neatly with other known details. Still, a Secret Service agent who stood right there cast doubt on one of the most important pieces of the case. That testimony should have been examined closely from the start. The fact that it was not only deepens the unease. Once theories are pushed aside, one basic question remains. Could one man using that specific rifle fire the required shots in the time available? The rifle was traced to a mail-order purchase from Klein's Sporting Goods in Chicago, made under the name A. Heidel, shipped to a Dallas post office box connected to Oswald. The alias also appeared on forged identification found on him after his arrest. On that point, the official case looks solid. The trouble comes when timing enters the picture. For years, many believed Oswald had only about 5.6 seconds to fire 3 shots with a bolt-action rifle. Later analysis suggested the available time may have been longer, perhaps around 9 seconds once the first missed shot is accounted for. Even so, the real tension sits inside the House. Select Committee's own 1979 dissent. The committee's acoustic analysis suggested the second shot came about 1.66 seconds after the first, but an FBI test in 1964 using Oswald's actual rifle found that the weapon could not be aimed and fired with the telescopic sight in less than about 2.25 to 2.3 seconds. That gap matters. A rifle needing more than 2 seconds between aimed shots does not fit comfortably with a shot interval of 1.66 seconds. To accept both claims, you would have to believe Oswald fired faster than the expert marksman brought in to test the rifle. Oswald had shooting experience, once qualifying as a sharpshooter in the Marines before dropping to a lower rating. That does not prove he could not have made the shots. It does leave the official story carrying a contradiction. It never fully resolved. Either the acoustic timing is wrong, the rifle testing is wrong, or Oswald performed beyond what the experts could manage. No final answer has ever settled it. Before the Carcano was traced to Oswald, there was a strange and overlooked stretch when the murder weapon was publicly described as a different rifle altogether. Early reports described it as a 7.65 Mauser. District Attorney Henry Wade even stated on television that the rifle was a Mauser. Only later did the FBI say the officers had made a mistake and that the weapon was actually a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano. A Mauser and a Carcano are not close matches. They are different rifles from different countries using different calibers. The confusion was not over a tiny technical detail. It was a clear public identification of the wrong gun in the first hours after one of the most important crimes in American history. The scene was chaotic. Officers were under pressure. Someone may simply have misread markings on an unfamiliar military surplus rifle. Still, early mistakes like this had lasting consequences. When the public sees officials name the wrong rifle in real time, trust weakens fast. From that moment on, many people stopped treating the first official account as something they could accept without question. One fact often gets missed, even by people who know the case fairly well. The government's second major investigation did not reach the same conclusion as the first. The House Select Committee on Assassinations carried out its investigation from 1976 to 1979. Its final conclusion changed the shape of the debate. The committee said President Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. At the same time, it still agreed that Oswald fired shots, and that one bullet wounded both Kennedy and Connolly. What it added was a fourth shot, believed to have come from a second gunman. That conclusion rested heavily on a dictated audio recording from a Dallas police motorcycle. According to the committee's analysis, the recording suggested 4 shots in total, with one coming from the grassy knoll. Then the ground shifted. A National Research Council panel later reviewed the recording and rejected the analysis, concluding the supposed gunshot sounds were unreliable and may have been recorded after the assassination. In 2013, new audio research commissioned by Larry Sabato questioned the recording further, suggesting the motorcycle may have been about 2 miles away at the time. The sound impulses once treated as gunshots may have been nothing more than motorcycle noise. If so, the central scientific support for the committee's conspiracy finding was badly weakened. If everyone in Dealey Plaza had pointed to the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, the lone gunman case would feel settled. But that is not what happened. Among witnesses who gave a location, about 52% pointed to the grassy knoll or underpass area, while about 39% pointed to the book depository. More people believed the shots came from the front than from the building linked to Oswald. That alone does not prove a second shooter. Human hearing is messy, especially in a plaza full of hard surfaces, echoes, and panic. Sound can bounce off buildings. Modern psychoacoustic studies help explain why witnesses could reach very different conclusions. Still, the problem remains. A majority of witnesses who named a direction pointed away from the official firing position, and the Warren Commission chose not to build much around that. It is easy to see why this has stayed with people for decades. Then there is the image that refuses to let go. The Zapruder film, a 26-second home movie filmed by Abraham Zapruder, has been studied frame by frame more than almost any piece of film in history. At the fatal headshot, President Kennedy's head and upper body move backward and to the left. For many people, that motion seems to say only one thing. If a bullet hits from behind, the body should move forward. If the body snaps backward, the shot must have come from the front. That reaction feels immediate and natural, and it is one of the main reasons so many viewers believe there had to be a shooter on the grassy knoll. Forensic specialists argue the motion can be explained by a neuromuscular response, along with a jet effect from material exiting the head. Ballistics work, autopsy findings, and trajectory analysis all support the conclusion that the fatal shot came from the rear. Even so, the visual force of that moment is enormous. A person can hear every technical explanation and still struggle with what the eye seems to show. That is why the phrase back and to the left still carries so much weight. It turns a forensic argument into something people feel in their gut, and that feeling has kept this case alive for generations. Some critics built their case on emotion. Dr. Cyril Wecht did not. One of the best-known forensic pathologists in America, he served on the forensic panel of the House Select Committee and for years rejected the single-bullet conclusion. His key point involved the bullet path in Kennedy's back. The Warren Commission described an upward trajectory, and Wecht argued that made no sense if the shot came from a gunman firing downward from the 6th floor. Then comes the stranger part. The president's brain was removed during the autopsy and preserved as evidence. If examined properly, it could have helped answer the central question of direction by showing the wound path more clearly. Yet, when Wecht sought access in 1972, he learned it was gone. The brain had been logged into the National Archives. Then it disappeared. So did related tissue slides and photographs. No one was ever clearly blamed. One theory says Robert Kennedy may have arranged to remove materials out of concern for the family, but that has never been confirmed. Whatever happened, the physical evidence that might have settled the front or rear shot debate most cleanly simply vanished. That is not a small inconsistency. It is a hole in the middle of the case. Lee Harvey Oswald never got to tell his story in court. 2 days after the assassination, Oswald was being moved through the basement of the Dallas jail. It should have been one of the most controlled spaces in the country. Police were everywhere. Reporters were packed in. Cameras were rolling, yet at 11:21 a.m. on November 24, 1963, Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot Oswald at point-blank range. It happened inside police headquarters. It happened on live television. It happened before the main suspect could face trial. Robert H. Jackson of the Dallas Times-Herald captured the moment in a photograph that won the 1964 Pulitzer Prize. The questions come fast. How did Ruby, a local nightclub owner with known connections to shady circles, get into that basement at exactly the right time? How did he get through an area that was supposed to be guarded? How did the man with the most important answers end up exposed long enough for someone to walk up and kill him? L. Ruby said he wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of a trial. Many people never believed that. His links to organized crime only deepened suspicion. Even people who reject more extreme conspiracy theories often pause here. The one man who could have answered the biggest questions was silenced before he could answer any of them. Few parts of the case stayed buried as long as the Mexico City episode. About 7 weeks before the assassination, Oswald traveled to Mexico City, visiting the Soviet and Cuban embassies to secure a visa. The CIA was watching those locations closely. When documents were released in 2025, they offered more detail about that surveillance. Yet the heart of the mystery goes beyond the trip itself. The CIA station had photo and audio surveillance on the embassies, but the man shown in the photos, later identified as Oswald, did not look like him. He appeared older, heavier, and different in the face. Reports about intercepted calls raised another problem because the voice did not seem to match either. This created the so-called second Oswald problem. Was someone pretending to be him? Was a false trail being built to connect him to communist governments? Or was it a simpler failure with the cameras catching the wrong man? No final answer has ever closed that gap. What's clear is that Oswald was being monitored weeks before the assassination, and the CIA stayed guarded for decades about what exactly it had on him. Once that fact settles in, the episode becomes difficult to dismiss. The Mexico City story leads into a broader concern. Oswald was on the radar before the assassination, and the intelligence community showed little interest in being open about how much it knew. One newly unredacted memo from Kennedy advisor Arthur Schlesinger Jr., released in 2025, described tension inside the government after the Bay of Pigs disaster. The memo discussed undercover CIA personnel stationed overseas and raised concern that covert operations were spilling into areas belonging to the State Department. None of that proves the CIA killed Kennedy. It does show that Kennedy distrusted the agency, that the agency had been watching his future assassin, and that the public was kept from key parts of that picture for more than 60 years. When information stays hidden decade after decade in a case this important, people begin to suspect that the silence is part of the story. That brings us to the most recent twist, which may be the most frustrating of all. In 2025, the long-promised release of assassination records was presented as a major turning point. Donald Trump signed an executive order on January 23, 2025, directing declassification of documents related to the deaths of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. At least 80,000 pages were expected, released through the National Archives on March 18, 2025. For many, this looked like the moment the mystery would finally crack open. Then came the letdown. Early expert reviews found little that changed the core story. Many documents had already been released in earlier years with redactions, and the newly opened versions mostly removed blacked-out sections without revealing a dramatic hidden truth. Even Trump lowered expectations, saying he did not think there was anything earth-shattering. That result created a new kind of unease. For decades, the government treated these files as sensitive enough to withhold. Then the release finally came, and much of it appeared to be old material with added detail. That leaves two troubling possibilities. One is that the files were never as explosive as the secrecy made them seem, raising an obvious question about why they were hidden so aggressively. The other is that the most sensitive material was never in this set to begin with. Neither answer brings comfort. The release filled in smaller gaps and gave researchers more texture, but the central question stayed exactly where it had been for decades. And in a case like this, that may be the strangest outcome of all.